Now we're going to start off, John, with this story that's been sort of running from the week, which is Jeremy Corbyn has not been given the whip, but they're letting the Tory MPs come in and have the whip. What do you think about this kind of double standard here?
Well, it says it all, doesn't it? You know, it's obvious that staying and fighting's going really well when Corbyn's out and this object is in. You know, and I saw it sat in that mask, being welcomed, and it. Well, you know, I try not to swear too much on this show, but it's difficult. You know, what I could stammer, you know, Mr. Forensic, he does this at the time when Johnson's on the ropes and throws him a lifeline, and it coincided with just after I'd finished watching PMQs, I got my umpteenth investigation letter from head of disputes and asking me to respond. Well, I've done a very short response, but don't that say it all? Socialists aren't welcome. Corbyn's out, and it's quite obvious that he's not going to be allowed back. Not only have they allowed this fella in, but it stops Bury South picking a decent candidate. They lumbered with a man who voted against feeding kids, voted to cut universal credit, and actually referred to Labour as a bunch of the C word, which is one of the few swear words I try not to use. But, you know, when it comes to PLP, we have to say the law averages work there. He absolutely nailed it. But, you know, we see the left. I've been reading that, Labour's not a broad church. If they don't, they've got to stop pleading, and they're talking about withdrawing the resolution to NEC to get a compromise. You cannot compromise with these Starmeroid bastards. They've shown what they are. And as for a broad church, Labour is, under Starmer, is representing one of these extreme evangelical churches that you see rising up in America. And the fact that they would have someone like him, while they're expelling thousands of socialists, 150 people, 150,000 have left the party, but the extreme right wing, and let's make no bones about it, when you look at this fella's record, it's atrocious. And to welcome somebody like that when the rest of us aren't welcome, it shows, you know, as far as Labour's concerned, I think the party's over.
Oh, well, thank you, John. You don't beat about the bush, really, do you? And thank you for not using the C word as well this on a Sunday morning. Yeah. Now, our next story, Deepa, is it's in quite a few papers. The NHS in talks on jabs U-turn to save 70,000 staff from the sack. And Britain's top GP backs NHS workers in war over mandatory vaccinations. Do you think that there's been a sea change now, and that we won't have to have mandatory vaccinations? And what do you think about the passports? I suppose that's part of the same thing, isn't it?
I think it's quite interesting that, you know, these guys pretended like they were clapping for the NHS workers and they cared about NHS workers. But now they're depriving NHS workers of something that they've already deprived care home workers of, which is a basic fundamental right to bodily autonomy and medicine, you know, the right to be able to make your decision as to what medicines are put in your body. And it's outrageous that care home workers face the sack first, because the reason they face the sack first is very clear. They were not in as much of a position of power as NHS workers. And the only reason they're probably kowtowing a little bit to NHS workers and making these positive noises is because the NHS is under huge amounts of stress already, because they've been privatizing it. and privatizing it to the back door. So I guess a lot of this is a little bit of hot air. I mean, these senior people should have come out. Of course, congratulations to him for speaking up for his staff, but he should have come out a long time ago in defense of his staff. You can't just clap for people and then pay them below a minimum wage in terms of the number of hours they do. Pay them atrociously, treat them atrociously, not give them PPE, and then go outside and clap with a plate and a spoon and make yourself feel better about it. So, I mean, this is a nonsense. If you look at the subtitle of one of the headlines on the NHS, it talks about anti-vaxxer groups, and I don't know if you can pull it up, Crispin, but to call somebody who has very legitimate reasons for questioning whether the long-term effects of these vaccines, to recognize that these pharma companies are the biggest criminals going around, and then to say, as nurses join anti-vaxxer rallies, and then say, oh, Britain's top GP backs NHS workers. It's a nonsense, isn't it? It's the media spinning what they should have been critically looking at from the start, which is whether these vaccines have the right testing, whether the information is right, whether people are making the right choices, not piling on to the undermining of civil rights and human rights in the way they have done.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. We're going to move on. John, this is a story you've got very few minutes to talk about. I'm sure you can manage it. This is in the Times, the front page of the Times, sacked as a minister because I was a Muslim. The Tories have rampant Islamophobia. I mean, blatant. And this has just come out here. I mean, how is it that they've been able to get away with this for so long?
Well, it's totally ignored by the media, the BBC especially. When you look at the treatment of Corbyn, and the massively inflated anti-Semitism smears that were thrown at the party, and all the while, I mean, the Tories are ripe with bigotry against every minority group, from Section 28 under Margaret Thatcher, going back to Enoch Powell's rivers of blood speeches, Boris talking about pickaninnies and things like that. And today, we've had Theresa May's hostile environment and its deportations. They want to drown. They've been talking about water cannons and wave machines in the Channel to stop desperate people seeking sanctuary. They'd rather see people drown than that. And to me, the biggest tragedy is these are the things that Labour should be calling out. But instead, they've welcomed the likes of Islamophobe Trevor Phillips. They fought an Islamophobic campaign in Batley and Spain. We should be fighting racism wherever it occurs. And the fact that we've got a government that is rampant with racism, with prejudice, as I say, against all groups, with no opposition, is the tragedy of today, I think. And, I can't have any sympathy for any Tory minister who's sacked, but it does say volumes about how rotten to the core the Tory party is.
Yeah. And sort of final story, Deepa, again, it's not easy to cover in this time, but in Ukraine, we've got two different narratives here. One is UK claims Putin is plotting a puppet regime. Blinken warns of swift and severe response to any invasion. And then the Morning Star's got a bit more balance to it about the pro-Russian opposition party in Ukraine, describing US sanctions as an act of political terror. What do you want to say about this? Sorry, that's a different story. What do you want to say about this, Deepa? Where do you sit on this?
Well, I
can't sit on the fence here. Can't sit on the fence here.
Well, I wasn't sitting on the fence earlier either.
I'm not saying you were.
I think, you have to recognize that US sanctions everywhere in the world are brutal, whether they're in Yemen, whether they're in Venezuela, whether they're in Ukraine. the US and the UK are responsible for holding back most of the world. They are responsible for bombing people out of their homes, destroying people, starving people. We've got Venezuela's gold sitting in the middle of a pandemic in the Bank of England's account because we are the poodles of the US. And so, the Morning Star's comment about, us, about the US and us being complicit is very true. I think there is a broader comment to be made about NATO forces accumulating on the borders of on the borders of Ukraine across various former Soviet blocs. And this is the thing that Russia is most concerned about. If you look at Declassified UK, they've Mark Curtis and Matt Kennard, who are doing some fabulous work, have been commenting about the role that Britain and America are playing and the NATO countries are playing in expanding eastward. And how, if you compare this to the Cold War, it would be similar to Russia standing on the borders of Cuba. So, and you can imagine how nervous America would have been if that had been the case and when that is the case. And now this is Americans and American allies across the NATO forces standing across Ukraine's borders, which makes Russia nervous because there are a number in the Commonwealth of Independent States, as they call the former USSR, where there are American bases. American bases are all over the world in places where they shouldn't be. And they are fomenting violence, they are fomenting war, they're fomenting terrorism. They're also fomenting it in very interesting ways, which are not covered by the news. And this needs to be said, which is there's a great article on the National Endowment for Democracy, which is an American intelligence front organization, essentially, funding loads of civil rights, human rights, free speech type organizations, and therefore planting stories and including, funding things like musical groups that would support pro-democracy groups against Maduro in Venezuela. So all of this creates a situation where Russia gets nervous, and quite rightly they get nervous, and America shouldn't be provoking this, and Boris Johnson and others shouldn't be making comments that create a new war with either China, which they're trying to foment through Australia, or in Ukraine. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And I wasn't aware of all those things you've just pointed out, and we should really feature more of this declassified journalism that we don't get on the mainstream media at all. I just wanted to ask you about this tweet that came up there a bit earlier. Yanis Varoufakis has said the High Court will deliver its decision on Monday morning at 10:45 a.m. on whether to permit Julian Assange to appeal his extradition to the UK Supreme Court. If it does not, it is down to Priti Patel. Time to put the pressure on to stop Julian's extradition is now. There's nothing in the newspapers about this, so I had to put a tweet on there as a story. Can you give us some more information about that and how we can pressure Priti Patel and anyone else?
Sure. Just to remind people, there is a vigil starting at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning outside the UK High Courts, organized by the Committee to Defend Julian Assange, which is the grassroots organization. Others like myself, who are legal observers and others, will also be attending the court. The case against Julian is a nonsense, but the way it is made into something material is by creating this veneer of a legal process. This man has suffered a stroke in prison. And it happened because they forced him to attend the hearing when he was feeling very ill. And in the course of this, the legal process is being used to institutionalize torture and arbitrary detention. And what they're trying to do is lengthen the legal process, because it's death by 1,000 cuts. It's punishment by process. And at every stage, you'll have these grand-wigged judges and these wonderful buildings. But at the end of the day, it's a nonsense to stitch up a journalist for revealing war crimes when the war criminals like Blair and Bush are sitting outside. Blair is getting knighted while Julian is in Belmarsh. Yeah. And so, if you'd like to support Julian, please join the committee to defend Julian Assange, join them at their protests and vigils every weekend, and during the week there are other protests and vigils. Please speak to your MP, talk to others about the case. I've written a one-page briefing that Crispin's kindly agreed to share with you, because most people feel nervous about the case, and it's got lots of links to useful information, so I hope that's useful. Thanks for bringing it up, Crispin.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll put that out on an email to people as well. I mean, it's appalling. There's nothing in the papers at all about this case tomorrow morning. Thank you, John, and thank you, Deepa.